Well, hi everyone. My name is Kennedy McGhee. I think there are going to be a few more people trickling in as we get started. But I'm so excited for everyone to be here today. If you have not signed up to be an NACC student member, it is free, and I'll drop the link in the chat. That way, you can sign up later once our speakers get talking. But my name is Kennedy, and I am NACC's National Law School Student Organizer. My goal is to help share the resources that NACC has available to our student members. And with that, this is our fellowship panel today. Could our three fellows begin by introducing themselves and talking a little bit about their specific fellowship? Dana, Hannah, or Alyssa, if you wanted to unmute.
I'm happy to start to jump in. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Stommel. I am a Zubrow Fellow at Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia. My fellowship, it's very specific to Juvenile Law Center. It's what I would call an in-house fellowship. So I am funded directly by Juvenile Law Center. And so, as you might guess from the name and also why I'm speaking on this panel, the focus of the work that I do is working with kids and advocating on behalf of young people. Specifically, my work is working, it's not so much squarely in juvenile law, it is advocating on behalf of young people who are now in the adult criminal system, either currently or they were decades ago, and they are currently serving long prison terms for crimes that they were sentenced, they were convicted and sentenced for when they were under the age of 18. And so the work really varies. There is a little policy for me. My team happens to be very litigation heavy. So it's all at the appellate level, whether we are counsel directly representing an individual or a class of people, or we do a lot of amicus writing, friends of the court briefs. That's a really big part, at least in the past few months, a part of my practice. So that's an overview of what I do. And I'm happy to take questions later on in this panel.
Perfect. And Dana, are you ready? Or
Sure, I can go. I will flag for everyone that I am traveling for work right now, and I'm currently at the airport, which we can talk about the ways that being a fellow is dynamic, and you have to be prepared to hop on a plane at a moment's notice. But I will just try to stay muted or mute if things get loud here. I am a Skadden Fellow at the National Center for Youth Law. And a Skadden Fellowship is one of those design your own fellowships. So my fellowship is something that I built myself alongside my colleagues at the National Center for Youth Law. And I am focused on the state of Hawaii, where I live and work, and trying to secure the right to counsel for children in child welfare cases. Hawaii is one of a handful of states where young people in child welfare cases who are in foster care do not have their own attorneys. They do not have the right to their own attorneys. So I work alongside a coalition of foster youth that I built as part of my fellowship, to under stakeholder engagement and try to build momentum around advancing this right. And then we do both policy advocacy and have an eye to litigation as well, but TBD on that.
and Alyssa, are you ready to speak?
Sure, yeah. My name is Elisa Hobian, and I also work at Juvenile Law Center with Hannah. So happy we're representing here. I have a bit of a odd path to my fellowship. So I went through the whole project-based fellowship process with Juvenile Law Center last year. So I'm happy to speak to how that went and the ins and outs of it. I really came to it with like zero understanding of what fellowships were. So no question is a silly question in my opinion, because yeah, I just kind of jumped into it. And I do wish I had had a bit of a better understanding. So with that being said, I applied for project-based fellowships, but did not end up getting one. But I did get a fellowship from my law school. So I have a 1-year funded fellowship with Juvenile Law Center. And so I can speak both to like developing a project for the project-based fellowships, but also my fellowship now is basically just plugging in wherever Juvenile Law Center needs support, which is a pretty awesome gig in my opinion. So currently I'm working on their Youth Safely Home team, which works right now we're working on issues of youth not getting credit for the time that they spend in secure facilities before they're sent to their placements when they're in juvenile delinquency proceedings. So that's one of the main issues that we're working on right now. I'm also on the debt-free justice team, which works on a range of issues, but broadly works on abolishing fines and fees that youth have to pay when they're going through any aspects of the legal system. So I'm on the team there and working on mostly policy. But on both the Youth Safely Home team and the Debt-Free Justice team, we're also doing planning to investigate potential litigation strategies for different issues that youth are facing. Um, yeah, so that's just an intro, but excited to speak with you all.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. I think that leads perfectly into our next portion. How did you identify the specific issue? And Elisa, this may not apply to you, but maybe to our other two panelists. But how did you identify the specific issue or client group that you wanted to address in your fellowship application? And before we get started, I'm going to drop in the NACC Child Welfare Law Career Guide. And in our Law Career Guide, we do talk about fellowships as well in there, so it gives you a little bit more insight.
I'm happy to start. So my fellowship is not a project-based fellowship. But it is very specific to working and advocating on behalf of young people. That is what Juvenile Law Center does. So I didn't go through the process, of needing to come up, which sounds like I never encountered that. And so I am excited to hear everyone's ordeals going through that because it sounds like quite the project in and of itself. But mine was really, it was like applying for any other job, that you would have after law school, for like a staff attorney job. So, applying, with, your law school transcript, a cover letter, letters of recommendation, writing sample. And I can talk more about those pieces of the application if folks are interested. But for me, I identified Juvenile Law Center as a place I wanted to work. And Juvenile Law Center has had this Zubrow Fellowship for, I believe it's over 2 decades now. It's been around for a very long time. And I knew I wanted to, from my experiences in law school, I did a lot of work on behalf of young people in the criminal system and also in family court, in the child welfare system. And so I knew I wanted a job that would kind of continue to allow me to kind of to exercise the skills I had been building to gain substantive knowledge going forward. And I think also having something that's 2 years, it's doing appellate level work. I did not do any appellate level work when I was in law school. It was all trial level work, whether it was internships or clinics. And so it was partly identifying the area, the kind of stage of practice that I wanted to do, as well as the subject matter, that being advocating on behalf of young people. And so finding an organization like Juvenile Law Center that has, again, I'm going to call it an in-house fellowship. It's a fellowship that it funds, and I know they're not alone in that. I think they are. I think that certainly is more rare to find, but it certainly was something that was very appealing to me, not having to come up with the project, being able to just jump into the work and kind of fill in wherever help was needed and is needed. So that was my path. So definitely different than a project-based, but identifying my interests and kind of going forward was definitely a key part of it.
Dana, do you want to jump in or?
Sure. Okay, so I'm gonna try to not ramble too much because there's so much, and I think Alyssa hinted at this, like the project-based fellowship world is a world, and I still don't really understand all of it, and I have one. So one thing I want to name is that even for project and that kind of like Hannah's fellowship, an organization might put out a call for applications for, if you would like to do an EJW or a SCADM fellowship, please feel free to apply. And they will have a project already. So they might say, For example, one of my colleagues at the National Center for Youth Law has a project-based fellowship that her team came up with. It's about reproductive justice for youth in immigration custody. So it is a project-based fellowship, but it's not one she built. Mine is, I think, kind of lucky in that it is one that I built myself, and the sort of path to it and the path to identifying what project I wanted to work on is that I represented children in dependency. Hold on, sorry. I represented children in dependency proceedings during law school, and I was just looking around thinking, okay, I have some interest in eventually moving home. What would that look like? Does this career path exist at home? And I realized it didn't, that this right did not exist for young people to have that type of lawyer. So of course that type of lawyer didn't exist as a career path where I wanted to live. And people started talking to me a little bit, older law students, professors, and saying, well, if that's something you're interested in, you should think about fellowships. And then I had a summer internship at the National Center for Youth Law, working on an entirely different issue. I was working on issues around young people being commercially sexually exploited. And it was very clear through that a lot of the root issues going on still had to do with the child welfare system for those young people. And that is also often true for the juvenile legal system. And it sort of built my passion for wanting to intervene at that early stage when young people are entangled within the through that I identified that population. The state was sort of identified for me because I wanted to move home. And then it was a matter of seeing if the organization would be open to it. And we can talk more about this. Maybe Alyssa has also thoughts on this, but I reached out to a number of organizations and applied to a number of organizations saying, this is the project I want to work on. Are you open to applying with me as a sponsor organization? Most of them said no. The National Center for Youth Law said yes.
Perfect. So it seems, even among our fellows that there are different paths to get, into a fellowship, whether it's the in-house route or, kind of knowing where you want to be in the project you want. Elisa, do you have anything to add, or do you want us to move on to the next?
I can quickly add, yeah.
Yes.
I initially applied to Juvenile Law Center because they posted on their website, similar to what Dana was saying. A lot of organizations will post just a broad fellowship application, different than Hannah's, which is an internal fellowship. It's like, we want to do a project-based fellowship with someone. We want to apply to Equal Justice Works, which is EJW. We want to apply to SCADA, and we want to apply to Catalyst, which are all of these outside funders that fund these project-based fellowships. And a lot of organizations will post that they want to apply with you, and then it's a two-step process. You apply to them, and then you apply to the project-based fellowships with a project that you either come to the organization with wanting to do, which Dana did, or you develop with the organization. And then there is the other option, which Dana said, of a lot of organizations don't have actual posting saying that they're accepting fellows, and you can just email them, like cold email them, and be like, I'm interested in doing a fellowship. Would you partner with me? And it's a great value add because a lot of public interest law offices are very small, and you're a free benefit to them if you get outside funding that you're bringing in with you. So it's a great way to don't be afraid to cold email people, organizations that you're interested in, because you are a huge benefit if you're able to get outside funding and bring it in. So in terms of actually identifying the project that I worked on with Juvenile Law Center, the fellowship position that I applied initially to them to then apply for funding for was focused on decarceration. So I knew that that was going to be the focus, and I wanted to do that. I knew that I wanted to do work that involved youth, and I knew I wanted to do work that was focused on basically abolition. And so I was really excited that this fellowship existed. And then once I got the fellowship with them, I worked with them to identify issues that youth were that they were seeing come up that they hadn't previously necessarily had capacity to address. So the project fellowship that I focused on had to do with status offenses, which increasingly youth are criminalized for behaviors just because they're youth. So, for example, curfews or skipping school, things like that. So we were trying to identify either policy solutions or litigation solutions to address that issue. But basically, we worked together to develop the project. So it's interesting because all three of us had very different paths. But that was the project-based fellowship of my process.
Very nice. Um, on the next portion, to help find out more about navigating careers, I'm gonna send the fellowship application link that Hannah sent to me. Hopefully it sends now in the chat. And then our next question is going to be, um, how did you navigate the application process? I don't know if this is going to change too much, but when you is basically, is there any advice that you could give?
So the only, I think, big pieces that I would share are, and this is what I have heard from folks who have, been on panels like this and just hearing them talking to current law students. Two things. One, depending on the nature of your fellowship, if it's going to be a really writing intensive fellowship, really focus on your writing in your application. And that means every single part, including your cover letter. I mean, sometimes cover letters, they can seem like a throwaway. When you're applying to public interest jobs, it seems like you don't ever stop writing cover letters. It is a full-time job writing a cover letter. But, it's one of the first things that an employer will see. And they get a sense of not just the substance of, who you are and what are your experiences, what do you bring, but also just your writing style. How do you craft? It's in a way you're making it an argument for why they should hire you. And so do pay close attention to your cover letter. Also with your writing sample, and that'll really vary depending on your employer, your particular fellowship. I don't know if it varies for project-based, if there are, writing samples, but at least for mine, I chose something. I happen to have been in classes that were focused on juvenile law. And so picking a writing sample that I was just very fortunate to have had that experience. And so pulling from, writing samples from classes where I had something to say about the subject matter for the fellowship I wanted to apply to. And I was a little bold in my writing sample. It was actually more of not an op-ed piece, but it was published online through my school's social justice journal. And it was making an argument for why Kyle Rittenhouse should have been charged as a kid. Just despite being horrified by the events that unfolded in Wisconsin. But he was 17 at the time. And this idea of if we think that no child should be transferred from the juvenile system to the adult system, that would also apply to someone like him. And it was a little scary submitting it because they're either going to love it or they're going to hate it. And it turns out they really liked it. So I think, and I talked to folks who I knew at my law school, who knew folks at Juvenile Law Center to kind of gauge, if how might this be received. And so if you have folks at your law school or somewhere within your network, I think try to talk to folks who maybe have a contact at that organization, even just to get a sense of what's the culture, what's the vibe. But big takeaway is focus on your writing, particularly if it is a really writing intensive fellowship.
Perfect. Yeah, I dropped in the chat. I said details really matter, and it sounds like you wrote about something you were passionate about, and with that risk, the passion comes through. So that's very great. Elisa or Dana?
Okay, so, and I'm hoping Elisa will fill in blanks and maybe there's a lot for project-based fellowship applications. It's a lot. And I saw someone drop in the chat a question about timeline. My memory is that you should be keeping your eye out. Well, I applied the summer between 2 and 3L, and I knew I had my fellowship by November of 3L. The timeline is a little bit different for Justice Catalyst, and then there's a couple other that are a little bit farther back. So I think Justice Catalyst would still be open and maybe it hasn't even opened yet. I applied for SCADN, Equal Justice Works, and Justice Catalyst, which was at the command of my host organization. And it was a tremendous, even though some of the applications are shorter than others. For example, the Skadden application is not actually a ton of writing. But there are a lot of components, one of which is a host letter that is, in my experience, sort of where you actually do the bulk of your writing. And so I had to write a letter as my host organization's executive director talking about myself, which is, if anyone wants to talk more about what that's like or how to do it, I'm happy to chat through it. I found it very strange. And the best advice I can give you is to ask for as much help as you think you might need, or even more than you need. One of the things I found really disorienting was doing an application for a job where there were like 8 different hands in it, and I was not necessarily the main hand for a lot of it. My applications went through, it was as though you're writing a some sort of legal thing for litigation at an organization where lots of people are writing it, but one person's name goes on it. I often am sent people's applications. I'm happy to read over materials if anyone wants that. I can put my email in the chat. But ask for help. Folks will want to help you. Professors will want to help you. If you have a career advisor at your law school that specializes in public interest, that is a really good person to be helping with a person like this. And there's a lot of unspoken, super elite, inaccessible rules to this process. For example, for Skadden, one of the things that I still find very strange is it's sort of an unspoken rule that you reach out to the director of the Skadden organization before the application's open and just have like an informal conversation with her about what you're thinking, and then the outcome that have worked on an issue like this, and then there's no actual purpose to it, and then those people reach out to us fellows and we're like, okay, well, you don't actually have to reach out to us, but happy to help. So ask for as much help as you want, because people who have been through the process especially will have a sense for some of those strange unspoken rules that you might not otherwise know about, especially if you, like me, didn't go to an institution that has a ton of fellows that apply every year.
I'll echo everything that Dana just said, like times a million. I totally agree. And it is a whole process. And I'm sure all of us are happy to share our contact information, like Dana just said, to answer any follow-up questions, because it really is, yeah, a whole process. And I think the timeline you outlined, but Skadden is the earliest for sure. And you find out the earliest as well. And then EJW is next. And then Justice Catalyst is a little bit more extended. And in terms of, I don't want to repeat too much of what was already said, but I think one thing that I'll add on is getting sample applications is really helpful. So either from if you have a public interest career person at your school, or if the organization that you're working with has hosted fellows in the past, I found the previous applications to be super helpful to draw from, because they're like pretty specific questions. For example, the EJW one asks you to lay out a timeline for the 2 years that you're going to be working. And so it has like, what are you going to do in your first 1 to 3 months? Now, what are you going to do from your 3 to 6 months? And so basically, it's, if you have a sample to draw from, that is just so much easier to think through. Like, first, I'm identifying potential clients, then we're laying out our litigation plan. These are the aspects of the litigation plan, blah, blah, blah. So I think sample applications is super helpful. And then, yeah, echoing the like weird unwritten rules of Skadden. I think that's pretty specific to Skadden, though. Like EJW doesn't seem to have those same kind of unwritten rules. And so happy to try and break down that inaccessibility as much as possible if folks are applying to Skadden. And the one other thing that I'll add is that I believe the EJW website also has fellowships that already have projects developed. And I didn't spend as much time looking through those, but like later friends or professors sent me a couple that I had wished I had spent time looking at, because that's cool that there are already projects that are in motion. And also a lot of them are really interesting. So to the extent that folks are still looking, I think that EJW, just looking at the potential project-based fellowships that already exist is an option.
Kennedy, do you mind if I jump in really quickly?
Yeah, of course.
I'd be interested in talking just briefly a little bit about, I don't see this as one of the questions, about the pros and cons of applying for fellowships.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure the others have thoughts on this as well, but it is a lot of time and effort, and it is a lot of time and effort without a particularly high chance that you will get one. And that was the first thing I was told when I was looking at applying for them. I said to my career advisor, what are the chances I go through this whole process and I don't get a fellowship? And she was like, oh, you almost certainly won't get a fellowship. Um, there's still benefits to going through the process, even if you don't, but it is a lot of work. And they don't pay particularly well, and they're a strange job. It's strange to have a job for 2 years. Um, and in some ways, there are certainly times when I talk to other fellows who are like, oh, I kind of wish I had just tried to become a staff attorney. That might have been a more clear path forward. So curious what other folks' thoughts are.
I definitely have a lot of thoughts. Like I said, I kind of feel like I was thrown into the process because at the beginning of or in the middle of this summer between my 2L and 3L year, I was also applying to clerkships and things like that, and had this interview with Juvenile Law Center for this fellowship, first part of the process where you just apply to the organization and see if they want to partner with you to then apply for outside funding. And felt like, oh, they want me to apply with them. Yes, I'm gonna have a job at the end of this, without fully understanding that throughout the project-based fellowship process, you can still apply to other positions. Like you have no guarantee that you will have a job at the end of the process. And so I think that some people are hesitant to tell you that even when you're applying for project-based fellowship funding, you can still apply to other like staff attorney positions. And if there are other things that you hear back from that you're more, I mean, at least similarly excited about, then like having a for sure job is a great thing. And also, I think yeah, the project-based fellowship system, I'll say, like is a little bit like I think it takes advantage of law students a little bit. And I think that there are huge benefits to it. I think a lot of public interest jobs are difficult to get, and fellowship jobs are like really helpful to get your foot in the door right when you're out of college, and you usually get incredibly substantive experience as a fellow that you might not get if you go somewhere else. So for a lot of jobs, I know that the fellowship route is basically one of the only routes to go. So and it allows you a lot of creativity in the different like issues that you're interested in, and developing a project itself is really valuable. So I will say that, but yeah, I think that I don't want to ramble too much more, but I'll echo that it's definitely a process, and don't be afraid to apply to other jobs while you're applying for fellowships, and be candid with your organization. I think like I had that come up, like if I was in, a third round of interviews with an organization, I'd let them know, like just to be clear, like, and people do understand that that's the case. So that's what I'll add.
Perfect. I think it is, as hard as some of these things are, to hear, hard to hear, it is good to know going into the application process, there is like a limited chance. It's a lot of work. So it is just good to know both sides of the information. I think our Zoom is getting cut short at 40 minutes. We only have 5 minutes left. I do want to, yeah, I'm trying to reach out to IT to see if there's anything I can do. But does anyone want to elaborate on what their day-to-day work looks like as a fellow? And feel free, if you want to share your emails, you can send those in the chat if there are further questions, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, I can say briefly. So my day-to-day, it's a lot of research, it's a lot of Westlaw, it's a lot of writing. But it's also, I spend a lot of time collaborating with colleagues. So, I mean, I think that's part of in a way, a nice thing about a fellowship, and this is, I think, true as well for first-year attorneys, is that you are not expected to know everything. Even senior attorneys aren't expected to know everything there is to know about the law. And so, at least at Juvenile Law Center, there's a lot of support built in, and being able to, we have a dedicated supervisor, even if they're not the supervisor for the people I can talk to and do troubleshoot and whatnot. And I happen to really enjoy that, and I think being able to actually craft arguments, and it's really cool when paragraphs that you write are filed in court. Especially, I'm in my second year of the fellowship right now, and at this point, that hasn't gotten old. Where it's really cool to see your work, pay off, even though at least at Juvenile Law Center, pretty much every single case is an uphill battle, and so we're not necessarily going for the win, although we hope to win. The law is oftentimes not on our side. So day to day, a lot of research, a lot of writing. If you enjoy that, I would highly recommend a fellowship like the Zubrow, whether it is a Zubrow fellowship or ones like it.
Lisa or Dana?
Yeah, I'll say briefly, relatively similar to Hannah's work. I think it's a lot of legal research, and it's more policy work than I thought it would be, just because I think when I was going through the project-based process, I had anticipated a lot more kind of like initial litigation strategy. So it's been interesting being flexible. And I think at the end of the day, whether you're an internal fellow or a project-based fellow, flexibility is really huge. So being able to be excited about legal research, and also like meeting with a congressperson, or trying to investigate like what the facts are on the ground, and meeting with like practitioners who are like public defenders, and seeing what potential policies are actually viable to address the issues that are going on has been super interesting. So very varied work, I will say, and have really enjoyed it. I think one thing to keep in mind also, just in terms of like legal profession generally, is really thinking about whether you want to do direct services, like client facing work, versus like more, I guess this is probably something you've heard, but like system impact work if you're doing public interest professions. Because I think something that I've realized already in a couple months is that I do miss some of the more direct client facing work that I was mostly involved in law school. So trying to think about like what you really enjoy doing and going after that, I think is helpful.
Okay, I think we're in the last minutes. If Dana?
I echo what Alyssa and Hannah both shared about sort of the dynamicism, and also that a lot of it is sort of computer based. It's a lot more research than I necessarily expected. I do, because what I'm working on is building something, I spend a lot of time court watching, watching the juvenile courts in Hawaii. I spend a lot of time traveling, and this is specific to being in Hawaii and also to being in sort of a rural state. I spend a lot of time traveling between the different jurisdictions, which in Hawaii are different islands, and meeting with folks in those different jurisdictions, parents council, the judges, children themselves, parents who are going through child welfare removals, to understand from their specific perspective in that jurisdiction what the needs are. I also do a lot of listening sessions. So throughout the last couple months, I have spent a lot of time planning and executing listening sessions in community spaces throughout Hawaii, where folks can come and share their experiences with the child welfare system. And then I am in the process of writing a big report that will go to the legislature and like convince them that children need the right to attorneys in child welfare cases.
Thank you all for joining. I'm so sorry this panel is getting cut short. Thank you especially to Lisa, Dana, and Hannah for sharing all of your insights.